Okay, Leader Daudt, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So for the second straight biennium, you're going to be leading the House Republican caucus as the minority caucus. What can Minnesotans expect from your caucus this year?
You know, I think my caucus is ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work solving the immediate problems that are facing Minnesotans. Number one, the response to the pandemic. Number two is the economic recovery that needs to happen in the state of Minnesota as we transition out of this pandemic. And number three, our state's budget. I think that people should be measured with their expectations of what can and will happen during the legislative session. I think the attention of the legislature will be and should be rightfully so focused on those three areas more than anything else. I think Minnesota businesses are hurting, Minnesotans are struggling. This is an opportunity for us to put our partisan differences aside and really roll up our sleeves and get to work on the things that will keep Minnesota a great place to work and live.
And as of now, the plan for the 2021 session is to largely do things, if not all, remotely. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's difficult to operate the legislature remotely and still feel like there's a sense of transparency and we're including the public. And really, I think there's a lot of important conversations that happen in the hallways and by poking your head into another member's office during a legislative session. So, I think those challenges are going to be difficult to overcome, particularly in a session where we're setting a state budget that's, nearing $50 billion. So those challenges are going to be difficult, but I think we have to do the best we can to be as transparent as possible and as inviting of the public to participate in that process as we possibly can be, and that's our commitment. I'm also hopeful that as the vaccine starts getting distributed more and more widely, that hopefully we'll see the numbers come down and then we can kind of return to the Capitol a little more, hopefully before the end of session. I'm hoping the last month we could actually be here in person, but I think that might be a little bit optimistic, but I'm still hopeful we can get back to normal sooner than later.
And throughout the many special sessions we had this summer and fall, you made attempts to end the governor's peacetime emergency powers. DFL leaders say that's not the right thing to do, that there's still a health emergency. Will your caucus continue to seek to end the governor's powers?
We will, and not because we don't think that the governor has done a good job or that we, disagree or agree with what he has done. We would just simply because the governor should be working with the legislature. And unfortunately, Democrats have really tried to politicize this issue. Instead of rolling up their sleeves and rising to the circumstances that are facing Minnesotans and doing the job that Minnesotans elected us to do, Democrats in the House have really sat on the sidelines and really run interference to just let the governor do everything that he's doing. The reality is there is no emergency. There is a pandemic, and it is severe, and it's affecting Minnesotans in many ways. But that's all the more reason for the legislature to be involved in the process. The word emergency means something that is timely, that needs a reaction very, very quickly. That's passed. The emergency existed for the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, I'll give you. But we're in like 10 months of this now. So the emergency has long passed. During that 10-month period, the legislature has been, or whatever, 10-month period. I think the legislature has been in session at least 8 times during that period. So the excuse to say that the governor needs to act quickly and that the legislature can't be involved is not an adequate one. There is no emergency anymore. There is a severe pandemic that requires us all to rise up and respond in a way that I think in a bipartisan way that I think Minnesotans would appreciate. But there is no longer an emergency that the governor needs to have this sole emergency power. And I think the excuses that they use for him to keep it really are rooted in partisan talking points. And unfortunately, I wish they would spend the time doing the job that Minnesotans have elected them to do and less time, trying to make COVID a partisan issue.
A November budget forecast projects $641 million surplus for this biennium, but looking ahead, there's a deficit looming, $1.3 billion, and if you include inflation, maybe even more than that. What do you make of those numbers, and what do you think should happen with the short-term surplus?
Well, I think the fact that we have a surplus in the current biennium is a statement, a testament to the resilience of Minnesotans, and really they're the ones who deserve the credit for that in getting us through this pandemic in a way that has left us in a fairly strong fiscal situation. If we are responsible as leaders in this state now and through the rest of this biennium, and we can get some federal dollars transferred back into the general fund, which was what I think the intent originally was when we passed some of that, nearly or a little more than $500 million worth of funding early on for COVID response. If we can get that money back into the general fund and then carry all of that money forward into the next biennium, that would make up for at least 2/3 and maybe 3/4 of the deficit that exists in the tails. I'm hoping for a better than expected recovery as we move out of this, because I think Minnesotans really have the capability and ability to do that, and I think do it safely. So, the situation's not as bad as some would make you think it is. And I think that those who are going to try to use this as an opportunity to raise taxes don't understand just the basics of what a healthy economic recovery is, because raising taxes in an economic recovery will simply turn us around backwards and set us back and cause more harm to our economy, more job losses, and we don't want to see that, right? We want to recover as quickly as possible. So I think the Democrats will also say that Republicans' only answer is to cut. Again, those are political talking points which are designed to divide people. A pandemic isn't a time to divide people, it's a time to unite people. So it's not about taxing our way out of it or cutting our way out of it. The more responsible way and the healthier way to get out of this economic slump is to grow our way out of it. And I think we can do that if we roll up our sleeves and work on it together.
Yeah, and kind of staying with that, partisanship has been more prevalent both nationally and here locally. How concerned are you about the partisanship here at the Capitol, and how can both sides work together going forward?
Well, I think we have to leave our ideology at the door and literally, and this is something I have advocated for years. Instead of us coming to the table with our solutions already in hand, I'd call that ideology, if you will, but those solutions are based in our own party ideology. What we should do is figure out what the problem is, put the problem in the middle of the table, look at it from every angle together, and then start throwing and spitballing every possible solution onto the table. And together we'll find some solution that actually solves that problem. And if we leave Minnesotans at the center of the conversation, and the problems that are facing Minnesotans as the center and the core of the conversation, and we leave our political ideology out of it and our kind of preconceived solutions, I think that would help us do a better job. And frankly, I think this is really a great time to put that idea into practice, because the problems that face Minnesotans right now are different than we've ever seen, and they're greater than we've dealt with in a long time. So if we could roll up our sleeves and really focus on our response to COVID, the economic recovery that will result from this slump caused by the pandemic, and getting through this and setting our state budget while managing people's expectations, I think it provides the perfect opportunity for us to work together.
And when all is said and done on May 17th, what will have to happen for this session to be called a success?
Well, I think if we can set the state's budget without, I think we can find some efficiencies in state government, but without massive cuts and without tax increases, I would call that a huge success. If we can get through this pandemic and the economic recovery with as many businesses and employers in Minnesota as possible being as strong and as healthy as possible coming out of that, and if we can make sure that we lose as few Minnesotans as possible as we get through the rest of this pandemic, I think those would all be key signs of success. And more than anything, I'd like to see the legislature rise to the level of the level of performance that this pandemic and the response to this pandemic call for, and really match the governor and show him that we're here, we're ready to lead, and we've got the right ideas to get Minnesota through this. I think all of those would be, if those things happen, I would consider it a successful session.